Legislative Day 25, Wednesday, March 24th. Roll call, Anderson. Baldwin. Beitman. Boner.
Here.
Bouchard.
Here.
Case.
Present.
Cooper.
Here.
Driscoll.
Here.
Ellis. French.
Here. Here.
Murphy. Guru. Hicks.
Here.
Hutchings.
Here.
James.
Here.
Kinski. Cole.
Present.
Cost.
Here.
Landon. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas.
Here.
Perkins. Rothfuss.
Here.
Salazar.
Here.
Schuler. Scott.
Here.
Steinmetz. Wasserberger. Kinski.
Here.
Perkins. Excused. And President Dockstader.
Here.
29 present, 1 excused.
Prayer by Reverend Mark Marston.
Let us pray. Our Lord in heaven, creator of all things seen and unseen, on this day, we ask that your Holy Spirit might be with those who have lost family members in Colorado. May they mourn the death, but celebrate the resurrection. Our Lord, we ask that you might bless these men and women who are here on this day. Call them that as they face tasks that might seem larger than themselves, that as we live in this world that has arduous tasks that are grand, inspire them, give them guidance. Our Lord, fill them with the Holy Spirit and remind them that they do not stand alone. Help them to lean on the wisdom of those who have seek and walked this path before them, that they know that they do not walk alone. They have those who are with them. Help them to seek their wisdom. For these things we pray through Jesus Christ. Amen and amen.
Senator Anderson, would you lead us in the pledge?
With allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Senator, just a moment. Senator Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to take just a second to publicly apologize to this body, to this chamber. I lost my temper in a public meeting this morning. It's something that's well beneath me. I will direct an apology to the chairman of my committee and to the members of my committee and to all of you. It's beneath the dignity of this office to lose my temper in a public meeting. I'm sorry for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Cooper, man of honor. Senator Kolb,
Privilege of the floor.
please do.
I'd like to introduce Sheriff John Grossnickel and Deputy Mauer to the body. They are my folks in Sweetwater, and I'm very proud of what they do every day and what they do for the citizens of this state. They protect us, they support our Second Amendment rights, and I'd like for them to get the due justice and support they deserve. Thank you.
Gentlemen from Sweetwater, welcome to the Senate. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to throw a plug in there for Officer Mauer, Jason Mauer. I knew him when he was just a little guy. He grew up and graduated with my son. He's grown up quite a lot. He's not any better looking than he was, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew he once was very small. He's always been a good kid, though.
Always good. Further privileges. Reading correction approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the Journal Committee report.
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 23, 2021 has been read and recommends it to be approved. Senator Kolb, Chairman.
Any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. New business, a reminder, we are still continuing to work with the University of Wyoming and their family practice services for healthcare. Appreciate Reverend Mark Marston for helping us with the prayer each morning. Today in Wyoming history, John Wesley Powell was born on this day in 1834. The city of Powell is named for John Wesley Powell, an engineer, forerunner to the present reclamation engineers, and one of the first to visualize a prosperous agricultural community, John Wesley Powell, born this day in 1834. Quote for the day, "The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page." St. Augustine. Session status today is the last day for third reading on bills of House of Origin. Friday is the deadline to vote on JCC report on a budget. A reminder for each standing committee chairman to work with their committee secretaries to set up interim topics for the next week prior to meeting as a joint committee. So work on your interim topics, Chairman. All right. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, March 23, 2021. Mr. President, the following bill failed to pass the House on third reading. Message number 272, House Bill number 174, Local Government Sales and Use Taxes, ayes 10, noes 50. Signed, Wendy Harding, House Chief Clerk. March 23, 2021, from the House of Representatives, Mr. President, the following bill passed the House in an amended form. Message number 271, House Bill number 173, School Finance Funding 2, ayes 41, noes 19. Signed, Wendy Harding, House Chief Clerk.
House bills on first reading. House Bill 92, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 92 engrossed, Revisers Bill, sponsored by the Management Council, passed the House, ayes 59, excused 1.
House Bill 92 is referred to management or referred to Committee 12 rules. House Bill 142, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 142 engrossed, Commercial Filing System Update, sponsored by the Blockchain Committee, passed the House, ayes 37, noes 22.
House Bill 142 is assigned to Committee number 2, Appropriations. House Bill 158, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 158 engrossed, Local Land Use Planning and Zoning, sponsored by Representative Harshman, passed the House, ayes 35, noes 24, excused 1.
House Bill 158 is assigned to Committee number 7, Corporations. House Bill 170, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 170 engrossed, Wyoming Economic Development Zone, sponsored by Representative Henderson, passed the House, ayes 35, noes 24, excused 1.
House Bill 170 is assigned to Committee number 9, Minerals. House Bill 187, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 187 engrossed, Elected Official Residency Requirement, sponsored by Representative Hunt, passed the House, ayes 42, noes 17, excused 1.
House Bill 187 is assigned to Committee number 7, Corporations. House Bill 197, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 197 engrossed, Connect to Wyoming Program Federal Funding, sponsored by Representative Newsom, passed the House, ayes 47, noes 12, excused 1.
House Bill 197 is assigned to Committee number 2, Appropriations. House Bill 198, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 198 engrossed, University Water System, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, passed the House, ayes 32, noes 27, excused 1.
House Bill 198 is assigned to Committee number 7, Corporations. House Bill 249, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 249 engrossed, Railroad Safety, sponsored by Representative Clifford, passed the House, ayes 36, noes 22, excused 1, conflict 1.
House Bill number 249 is assigned to Committee number 8, Transportation. House Joint Resolution 9, first reading of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 9 engrossed, Local Government Investment in Equity, sponsored by Representative Sweeney, passed the House, ayes 43, noes 16, excused 1.
House Joint Resolution 9 is assigned to Committee Number 7, Corporations. House Joint Resolution 11, first reading of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 11, State Sovereignty Impacted by Federal Action, sponsored by Representative Summers, passed the House. Ayes 56, noes 3, excused 1.
House Joint Resolution 11 is assigned to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Reports from standing committees.
March 23, 2021. Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 133 engrossed online sports wagering, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, and Perkins. No Senator Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chairman. March 24, 2021, Mr. President, Committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 52 engrossed. Wyoming School Protein Enhancement Project. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Guru, Kinsky, and Perkins. Excused Senator Hicks. Conflict Senator Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chairman. March 24, 2021, Mr. President, Committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred House Bill 217, Community Health Center and Rural Health Clinic Grants. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Baldwin, Bouchard, Furphy, Hutchings, and McEwen. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. March 24, 2021, Mr. President, Committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 67 engrossed, Geothermal and Hydro-related Energy Review. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, and Steinmetz. Excuse Senator Perkins. Senator Kinsky, Acting Chairman.
Chairman Landon.
Mr. President, if I could ask that House Bill 17, range management at military training areas, which passed out of committee this week in transportation, it does have a modest, just a modest appropriation. And I'd like to have that re-referred to our Appropriations Committee.
Absent objection, that bill is referred to Committee number 2,
Thank you.
Appropriations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anybody else? All right, let's move to bills on second reading. Senate File 4, second reading of the Senate file.
House Bill 4, Mental Health Professions Practice Act Amendments.
There are no amendments. House Bill, excuse me, for the record, House Bill 4, having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. And again, for the record, that is House Bill 4. House Bill 7, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 7, Air Ambulance Membership Organizations Regulation.
There are no amendments. House Bill 7, having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 20, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 20, Driver's License Requirements Visual Acuity.
House Bill 20, there are no amendments. House Bill 20, having been read 2 separate. Oh, Mr. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. And sorry to interrupt. Fellow senators, I just wanted to spend a moment to get back to the body with regard to House Bill 20. We were going at a pretty good clip yesterday, and I want to apologize for not getting up quickly enough. The good senator from Sweetwater County took us to a vote, and away we went. And I think there was maybe not enough explanation on this bill. That's our fault. I just wanted to let you know the reasons for the bill to give you a little bit more background. This was a bill that was recommended to the interim committee and came out as an interim committee bill. It was recommended during the recent shutdowns due to the COVID emergency. What this does, it moves the requirement for an eye test into rules and regulations, and it's going to allow our Department of Motor Vehicles, Mr. President, to modify those rules in an emergency situation. It's also going to allow for some flexibility. We had good testimony from our optometrists who are going to work very closely with WYDOT on this. I think the reason I think the committee liked it in part is that it gives us a chance to maybe expedite the process for our constituents when they go to get their driver's licenses. I think it's a good bill, and it just, it moves some things off the table and into the rules and regs where they can be flexible with what they expect on the eye exams. The optometrists say that we're going to be absolutely good on this front. So I hope that helps people to know at least the genesis of the bill. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
President.
Does anyone have any discussion or questions for the Chairman of Transportation? Senator Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the difference between a vision test and a visual acuity test?
We'll take that back home to Senator Landon.
Well, let me see if I can get to that. You know, we had testimony on that, and that's a great question. I think that an eye test is the full-blown deal that is sometimes required for those who need assistance to get to, I think, a 2040 level. We learned that in committee. But in this case, the eye test that you actually take there, and you can remember all of us look into that little thing and we see how far back the balloon is, and they ask you to look at some signs and things. The testimony in committee was that through those sorts of things, they feel like they can test your acuity enough that they are going to be satisfied to provide you with the license. And so it's a little bit lower standard of expectation there, but I think again, it's going to give our constituents back home, I think, a little less time of waiting 2 to 3 hours to get the driver's license. And so we were assured that they're going to work pretty carefully with our eye doctors. So thank you, Mr. President.
He actually opened up with that phrase, I see. Okay, let's, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate that explanation. I think that takes care of it. All right. House Bill 20, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 29, second reading of the Senate file.
House Bill 29, burials for indigent persons.
There are no amendments. House Bill 29, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 33, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 33, interference with public contracting.
House Bill 33, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 46, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 46, crime of bestiality.
House Bill 46, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 49, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 49, agency fee revisions.
House Bill 49, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 54, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 54, Wyoming meatpacking initiatives.
There are amendments. Please read in the first amendment.
House Bill 54, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1, line 5 after.
We are on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 54. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 54. Folks, what this amendment does is we drop in on and add in that these are exceptions that make it where they could have to go no more stringent than federal law requires. So what the language says is, except that the Director of the Department of Agriculture shall not promulgate any rules which impose standards or requirements related to meat processing, which are more stringent than the federal law, rules, or regulations. And then you drop down under 3511-112 and adds a new section. The council shall not promulgate any rules which impose standards or regulations related to meat processing, which are more stringent than federal law, rules, or regulations. Folks, you're going to start seeing these amendments appear. What we've run into is the state of Wyoming and its infinite wisdom quite often goes beyond the areas that we got federal primacy on, which meatpacking is one of them. They go beyond our federal rules and impose rules on ourselves that even the feds wouldn't impose. So this literally says you can't go beyond the federal rules. And these are good common sense amendments. I'd stand for questions and ask for your favorable approval.
Questions or discussion for the senator? Ready for the question? Oh, question being called. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 54, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. There is a second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 54. Read in the amendment.
House Bill 54, second reading amendment number 2 to engross copy, page 2, line 14, delete.
On to the big screen, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 54 and ask for the body's favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just a cleanup amendment to making sure we're consistent with our language on page 2, making sure that we delete an and and insert nor that's consistent with other references to the same subject on that page. Also, in similar vein on page 3 and line 9, making sure that we're using consistent language instead of having language talking about exports. We're talking about international sales and export of our meat products. So not a substantive amendment, but one that makes sure we have consistent language throughout. Would certainly stand for any questions. If not, I'd call for the question.
Any discussion or questions for the sponsor? Question being called. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 54, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. Second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 54. House Bill 54, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 57, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 57, advance enrollment.
There are no amendments. House Bill 57, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 58, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 58, State Parks Account Expenditure Authority.
There are no amendments. Oh, sorry. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to follow up on a discussion we had during Committee of the Whole about the fee increases and how they relate to the request for increasing the percentage of how funds can be used for our state parks. As you know, we authorized the legislature a fee increase for certain permits. So to answer those and put a finer point on it, annual permits for residents to access our state parks is $48. For non-residents, that's $96, and that's for the entire year. However, the cost to enter on a per day visit is $7 for residents and another $10 for night or camping for the night. Non-residents pay $12 for the day use and $18 if they're to camp. And so if you look at those fee increases and the overall projected average of how many people visit our state parks approximates that it will generate about $500,000 per year or $1 million per biennium. So under current law, the state parks can only utilize 30%, which is $300,000 per biennium for maintenance, which leaves them about $800,000 short after the governor's phase 2 and phase 3 reductions. So hopefully that addresses the question. This really is about kind of balancing the need of allowing the state parks more flexibility to use the fees that they're collecting. And really the intent is to continue operations as they've been done in the past, maintain the status quo, not add any new construction projects, but ensuring that we're providing visitors with a good experience at clean and safe state parks. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Ellis. Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question about, in light of what you just said, in light of the bill. My recollection is that those fees generally have been used, among other things. There was what was for capital construction, but also maintenance. But it seemed to me that they also supported some personnel. And so, I mean, obviously, if we're increasing the amount that's available for maintenance by 30%, we're taking it away from something else. And I'm just wondering if you could let us know and help us understand and make sure that we understand what it is that is being defunded so that this part is funded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
We're on second reading of House Bill 58. Further discussion or questions? Let's go back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will visit with state parks to make sure that I'm giving you accurate information, and I'll follow up with you on third reading. But as you heard in the presentation of the bill, there were 3 full-time employee positions that were eliminated. We did hear concern about the increased visitor traffic, particularly at places like Glendo. And so we understand that some of these funds will be diverted for seasonal law enforcement. During the season, as was mentioned, Glendo State Park gets to be like the 3rd largest city in Wyoming. So the State Parks Division actually hires retired law enforcement and others to fill some of those seasonal positions. So I'll get you a finer point, but I know that was one issue that was that we discussed quite a bit in committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. House Bill 58, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 69, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 69, Division of Banking Fees.
House Bill 69, there are no amendments. House Bill 69 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 73, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 73, Birth Certificates, Gestational Agreements.
There is an amendment. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73 and ask for your favorable consideration. Obviously, this amendment goes into page 3 after line 22, and what is designed to do is alleviate some of the concerns. I know many of you are probably getting the same emails that I am on this bill, and so we just want to make sure that this is not a for-profit adventure here. So it just says compensation is limited to expenses related to prenatal care, delivery of the child, and any other costs that are directly connected to the pregnancy. With that, I stand for questions or call for the question.
Any discussion or comments for, okay, Senator Perkins?
I have lots of questions today, I guess, Mr.
Line 'em up.
President. We went through these really fast yesterday, and so I appreciate these amendments. I guess my question would be, I mean, when you look about other costs directly related to pregnancy, I mean, so we're talking about generally the surrogate mother, and I get the concept, and I support the concept that we don't want to create bidding wars, or we don't want to pay someone to carry basically another woman's eggs, the mother's eggs, to birth. I get that. That's a great. I think that's a great policy position. But one of the costs directly connected to the pregnancy is, depending on how the pregnancy works out for the surrogate mother, they may not be able to work. And so I'm wondering if, I mean, and so somehow we got to make sure we strike this balance between, we don't want to sell this service. We don't want this to be an industry where we sell this service, but at the same time, you need to have women who are so selfless enough to step forward and do this as a surrogate mother, to make sure that ultimately they're not harmed either. So I'm just wondering, when we talk about costs directly connected to pregnancy, does that include the, I guess for lack of a better word, the lost opportunity or lost employment cost if the surrogate mother can't work, or is it taken into consideration would this amendment prohibit that? Thank you, Mr. President.
Over to you, Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm thinking along the same lines. I'm wondering about things like transportation costs, potentially housing costs. Maybe in terms of what is happening with this person and their family, maybe there are other costs to help provide for that family while this person is doing this wonderful thing. And I wonder if this might be an area where we shouldn't over legislate and overly restrict. So I don't think we can draft an amendment for all this. It says costs related to pregnancy. It's when one family gives so much to help another family, it's pretty hard to figure out what all those costs would be and define them as being related to the pregnancy.
Further discussion. Back to the sponsor. We are on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And those are all good and valid points. I don't think this amendment precludes any type of generosity or giving by someone who is giving so much to the other folks. But if you would like to help me tweak that language on third reading, I would welcome that help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Question being called on the amendment Second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it.
Division.
Division being called. All those in favor, please stand. Fourteen, go ahead. Those no? Fourteen. Amendment fails. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I rise to explain my vote or lack thereof on this last amendment. Mr. President, I was unable to obtain a copy of the amendment and didn't know what we were voting on, so I did not choose to vote.
Senator, okay. We are back on the bill, House Bill 73. Having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 76, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 76, Uniform Statewide Payment Processing.
There are no amendments. House Bill 76, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 86, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 86, Off-Road Recreational Vehicles Registration Authorized.
There are no amendments. House Bill 86, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 87, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 87, Provider Recruitment Grant Program.
House Bill 87, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 91, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 91, Removal of Unenforceable Property Covenants.
There is an amendment. Read in the amendment.
House Bill 91, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 3, lines 14 through 23, delete.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 91. And to explain this amendment, I would like the body to turn to page 3. There's a section here that basically talks about the conveyance of the deed and the information that we were trying to omit in this legislation here. Unenforceable parts of that would be included on a title or a deed, I should say. What happens here when you're closing a property? Agent's not there, broker's not there, things happen. I do understand that the intent of this amendment is probably to let you put a document on it if it was missed. Then you could just simply put a cover page on the document, you can move on. Bottom line is, real estate agent or broker are not there during that in many cases. So I had talked to the bill sponsor about just taking the real estate broker and agent off. And they actually came to the conclusion that we would best just strike the whole thing. So I talked to the bill sponsor on this. And so we're actually striking from line 14 to the next page. So on page 3, line 14 to 23, and then on page 4, lines 1 and 2. So bill sponsor said it was a friendly amendment. So I'd ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you. I'll stand for any questions.
Discussion or questions for the sponsor? Seeing none. Question on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 91. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. House Bill 91, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 111, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 111, access to anatomical gifts and organ transplants.
There are no amendments. House Bill 111, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 118, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 118, Food Freedom Act amendments.
House Bill 118, there are no amendments. House Bill 118, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 120, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 120, Hathaway Scholarships Success Curriculum in Middle School.
There are no amendments. House Bill 120, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 121, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 121, State-Funded Capital Construction.
There are no amendments. House Bill 121, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 1, Senator Driscoll.
Without objection, I would ask that House Bill 135 be laid back 2 days.
2 days.
2 days.
2 days.
I object.
We do have a correction here up front. Senator Driscoll, we can lay it back for 1 day.
Do it again tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay.
Without objection, 1 day.
Okay, without objection, House Bill 135 has been laid back 1 day. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. President, we do have a consent list. I move the following Senate files be adopted on third reading. Senate File 28, Motor Vehicles Security Inspection. Senate File 104, Anesthesiologist Assistance. Senate File 112, Insurance Discount for Accident Prevention Training. Senate File 127, Wyoming Learn While You Earn Program. Senate File 138, School Board Trustees, Party Affiliation. Senate File 139, Community-Based In-Home Services Program. Senate File 141, Business Entities, Representation in Detainer Cases.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the list? Having been read three separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 28, Motor Vehicles Security Interest Perfection. Senate File 104, Anesthesiologist Assistance. Senate File 112, Insurance Discount for Accident Prevention Training. Senate File 127, Wyoming Learn While You Earn Program. Senate File 138, School Board Trustees Party Affiliation. Senate File 139, Community-Based In-Home Services Program, and Senate File 141, Business Entities, Representation in Detainer Cases. Chief Clerk, call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson, Baldwin, Whitman, Boner,
Aye.
Bouchard,
Aye.
Case, Cooper, Driscoll,
Aye.
Ellis, French,
Aye.
Murphy, Guru, Hicks, Hutchings, James, Kinsky, Cole, Cost, Landon, McEwen, Nethercott, Pappas, Perkins,
Aye.
Rothfuss, Salazar, Schuler, Scott, Steinmetz, Wasserberger, President Dockstader. On the consent list, 30 aye. Senate File 28, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 2830I. Senate File 104. Are there any changes?
Driscoll, I don't know.
Driscoll, I to know. Guru, I to know. Case, I to know. Cost, I to know. Lightman, I to know. Salazar, I to know. Hutchings, I to know. Baldwin, Baldwin conflict. Cooper, I to know. Hicks, I to know. Kinsky.
French, I to know.
French, I to know. Kinsky, I to know. Steinmetz, I to know. Ellis, I to know. Wasserberger, I to know. Anderson, I to know. Dockstetter, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 104. 13 aye, 16 no, 1 conflict. Senate File 112. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 112, 30 aye. Senate File 127. Are there any changes? Case, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 127, 29 aye, 1 no. Senate File 138. Are there any changes? Rothfuss, I to know. Schuler, no. Case, no. Guru, no. Landon, no. Pappas, no. Murphy, no. McEwen, no. Cost, no. Baldwin, I to know. Cooper, I to know. Perkins, I to know. Wasserberger, I to know. Anderson, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 138, 16 aye, 14 no. Senate File 139. Are there any changes? Scott, no.
Rothfuss, I don't know.
Rothfuss, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 139, 28 aye, 2 no. Senate File 141. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 141, 30 aye.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 28, Motor Vehicles Security Interest Perfection. Senate File 112, insurance discount for accident prevention training. Senate File 127, Wyoming Learn While You Earn program. Senate File 138, school board trustees party affiliation. Senate File 139, community-based in-home services program. Senate File 141, business entities representation in detainer cases. These bills have passed the Senate. Senate File 104, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 104 has failed to pass the Senate. Continuing with bills on third reading. Senate File 81, Second Amendment Preservation Act, having third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 81, Second Amendment Preservation Act, sponsored by Senator Bouchard, an act relating to firearms.
There are amendments. Read in the First Amendment.
Senate File 81, third reading amendment number 1, delete.
Senator Bouchard. No, excuse me, this is Senator Hicks. I apologize. Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 87. Members of the Senate, I bring to you amendment to Senate File 81, but I want to preface it with a few comments. Mr. President, we have a government that's supposed to operate through the consent to the governed. The question is what do we do if we do not consent to usurpations and abridgment of either our God-given or our constitutional rights? What do we do if we do not consent? As a people, as an estate? Mr. President, we have two options before you today in the current bill. We have one option, and I'll present you a second option through the amendment on the bill, Mr. President. In the bill, we have 5.5 pages of legislative findings, and to a lesser extent is a verbose restatement of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And to a greater extent, it brings in the doctrine of compact theory that was a culmination of the Kentucky Resolution and nullification that has been struck down by the Supreme Court, has been rejected by the states, and has ultimately been arbitrated on the battlefields of the United States of America. Mr. President, the second component of the bill, in my opinion, creates a great unattainable conflict within the state of Wyoming. We've now come to the point, because of federal infringement upon our Second Amendment rights, we're going to create uncertainty, jeopardy, and litigation amongst our citizens and our court systems, against our municipalities, and potentially against our law enforcement personnel. Mr. President, there is an alternative that's been presented to you. Members of the body, I have distributed to you the 4-step plan as to how to deal with the federal government. I draw from you on the amendment, Mr. President. I borrowed from a bill moving through the Arizona legislature that has passed the House, passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, and will move to the floor. There's similar legislation in Texas, West Virginia, and I borrowed from the laws passed by the state of Montana. And Mr. President, I've borrowed heavily from James Madison. I've handed out to you James Madison's 4 steps is articulated in the Federalist 46, members of the Senate. We have 3 seminal documents in the history of the United States: the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Federalist Papers was an essay of 85 papers by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. And the purpose of those was to present to the people of the United States a discussion of what the Constitution did, how it would be implemented, and how they envisioned it would work before the ratification. Mr. President, I borrow heavily from the Federalist number 46 penned by James Madison, who actually foresaw a time and the consequences that we're dealing with today where we might have a federal government that infringes upon our rights, abridges our freedom, and commits unattainable acts. Mr. President, I'll walk you through those four outlined by James Madison. Number one was the disquietude of the people. Madison envisioned a point where the federal government would create laws that were repugnant to the people and that the people would exercise their ability and their opportunity to object. The second of the four legs of the Madisonian doctrine, which is often referred to the doctrine of resistance to our federal government, but Mr. Chairman, number three, as articulated by Madison, the frowns of the executive magistrate of the state, our governor, was the third leg of that. The second leg was refusal to cooperate with the federal government, Mr. Chairman, and the fourth leg in the handout was by legislative device, Mr. President. Mr. President, the amendment draws on those other states that I've discussed and those bills that are currently moving through legislative process, and the guidelines is established by James Madison. Mr. President, I would like to walk you through the amendment.
Senator, would you like, you are at your time limit, would you like to use from your next time, or what would you like to do there?
Mr. Chairman, I will yield to my colleague.
All right, Senator Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to do this. I think the reason will become apparent here in just a second. I want to divide the amendment. And the first division is, well, let me do the second division. We'll do the second division first. We'll identify the second division first. The second division is lines 18 through 24 of the amendment, which is simply the appropriation. And division one is the rest of the amendment.
So you're on page.
On page two of the amendment. Excuse me, page three
Page
of the
three of the
amendment.
amendment, line 18.
Yes, line 18, section 4.
Okay, and everything below that, section.
No,
4.
no, just section 4 itself. So it's line 18 through 24. That's section 2
Okay,
or division 2, and the rest of the bill is division 1.
all right.
And
You are
I'd like
in-
to take division 1 first, and I would go ahead and yield time back to the sponsor of the amendment.
Yielding the rest of your time back to Senator Hicks.
No,
and-
no, Mr. Chairman, I'm not yielding. I'm just, that's divided. So the time starts over again on division 1.
Understood.
So I'm
Okay.
just yielding back to the.
You got a fresh
to the
start,
sponsor.
Senator Hicks.
It's a fresh clock.
Are you on division 1 now, Senator Hicks?
Mr. President, I am on division 1.
On division 1.
Division one goes in there and it deletes the entirely the Hutchins amendment, deletes the Bouchard Committee of the Whole amendment. On line 7, it goes in and deletes lines 1 through 13. And line 9, the amendment deletes entirely pages 2 through 13, Mr. Chairman. On the amendment now reads an act relating to firearms prohibiting the enforcement of unconstitutional federal actions that infringe upon the right to bear arms, prohibiting the expenditures of public and funds to enforce unconstitutional federal action, authorizes the executive orders, an action to implement the act, providing for representation by the Wyoming Attorney General of citizens of the state of Wyoming against unfederal or the federal acts that unconstitutionally abridge the right to bear arms, provides for rulemaking and appropriations, which is division 2. Mr. Chairman, if we go on down there and we create the new section 914-103, Subsection A, this is one of Madison. This is his third leg. Upon the issuance of an executive order authorized under this section, no public officer, employee of the state, or any political subdivision shall attempt any federal action subject to the executive order. Subsection B brings in the redress of grievance by the citizens of the state of Wyoming through our Administrative Procedures Act. Any 25 citizens can petition the Attorney General if they so deem that there's been a unconstitutional violation. That period of time, once that petition is received by the Attorney General, they have approximately 30 days that the Attorney General then rules on that. We go down to subsection 13 or subsection C on page 2. At this time of the disposition of the petition, if the Attorney General determines that the federal action is unconstitutional, and if the governor then makes an independently determines the federal action to be unconstitutional, the governor would then issue an executive order banning and prohibiting local governments and state governments for participating in the enforcement of any federal law that was deemed unconstitutional. This is Madison's second leg. Subsection D, no public officer, employee of the state, or a political subdivision shall expend any federal funds. This gets into Madison's step 4 of legislative action. Nothing in this action will be construed to prohibit or limit law enforcement for participating in any other federal action unrelated to an unconstitutional act in the executive order. Brings in the definition of federal action, laws, executive orders, administrative rules, regulations, and statutes or ordinances implemented by the federal executive or the legislative branch. Brings in the existing Second Amendment Defense Act at the bottom of page 2, 914-101, Mr. Chairman, provides a new subsection B. The new subsection B says the Attorney General shall defend any citizen of the state of Wyoming who is prosecuted by the United States government for violation of any federal action to which the executive order issued pursuant to 914-103 was deemed unconstitutional. Subsection 3 brings in Madison's fourth leg, which is the Attorney General of the state of Wyoming may coordinate with the attorney generals of other states which have enacted laws similar to the acts to develop appropriate response to federal actions which violate the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Mr. President, I stand for questions on Division 1 of Amendment.
We are in Division 1 of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 81. Senator Kinski.
Mr. President, thank you. This amendment, folks, is an amendment that preserves the heart and soul and spirit of what we hope to do in this legislation. And it also resolves the dilemmas and the quandaries we've had as we've considered it. And so you can see in the solution that's coming up from other legislative bodies, they've had the same discussions and the same struggles. So the question is, if there's an unconstitutional infringement of Second Amendment rights, what is the mechanism by which we bring that to the attention of the authorities so that we can exercise our constitutional right to refuse to comply with that federal mandate? The mechanism in the bill currently awaits for the officer to stumble. That's a line from an old constitutional law case. They're waiting for the officer to stumble. In other words, the mechanism now is an officer on the scene does something wrong with respect that he makes a mistake and he takes a gun when he shouldn't have taken a gun, and that violates a federal law that the state hasn't recognized. And now he's not in court, but his city or his county is in court, liable for up to $50,000 plus attorney's fees, plus the expense of the trial. And then after all that, we find out whether that particular action of the officer infringed on somebody's Second Amendment rights pursuant to something the federal government did on or after the date of the enactment of the bill. That's no way to legislate. And it places the officers constantly in jeopardy. So you've all heard about this from your friends in law enforcement. It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and the wife's got a bloody nose, a broken nose, and the kids are screaming, the officer's there, and there's some guy drunk, and he's yelling, and and there's firearms there. What is the right thing to do? Well, they know the right thing to do, except what they do might infringe on some federal mandate that is subsequently to be determined in a courtroom is unconstitutional. That we can't place the officers or cities and towns and counties in that kind of position. So the mechanism here instead is, if there's some pronouncement by the federal government, you go to the Attorney General and get a clear determination, and then the chief executive of the state issues in an order. And so then now we have a chance for the officers to clearly understand what the laws they are or are not to enforce. It's a much clearer mechanism. And it's consistent with our constitutional right as a state to refuse to participate in enforcement of laws that we believe are unconstitutional, as outlined in Justice Scalia's decision in Prince versus United States in 1997. At issue there was an order to county sheriffs as to how they were to handle proposed transfers of firearms. And they made, this was a federal statute which ordered county sheriffs to receive a form from firearms merchants and make an effort within 5 days to determine whether or not the transferee could legally receive a firearm and so forth. That was struck down, saying the states have every right not to comply with federal laws that they believe are unconstitutional, and nor can the federal government compel local officers to comply with federal law. It's the separation of powers under the 10th Amendment. And so this treads that line. It answers the question that the appropriations chair asked the first day when this bill was read. He said, I get it. Some laws may or may not be unconstitutional, but who decides? When do they decide? Where do they decide? And how do they decide? This amendment says we're going to take it to the Attorney General and do this in an orderly fashion, rather than wait until a police officer makes a mishap and then the town gets sued to find out. So on and for the amendment, Mr. Chairman, I think it preserves the spirit of the bill while resolving a number of quandaries we've had as we've considered it throughout our discussions.
Senator Byman.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question on how this is going to be enforced. If you violate 914-103 as contemplated in this amendment, especially subsection or paragraph A there, what is the penalty? I don't see any sort of teeth in here. So is it just a strongly worded letter we're writing here, or is there going to be any sort of protection for the rights of the people? Thank you.
Further comment, further questions? Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I kind of feel like I'm in a convention of states. You know, what's being argued here is somehow the Federalist Papers mean anything after the ratification. That's already happened. We've got all kinds of court cases. Bottom line is this guts it. You know, and by the way, I'd like to call for a recorded vote. There's no timestamp in here. All the things that I just heard that we're going to fight against them. We're going to fight. We're going to fight. We're going to fight. The class 3 weapons. You just set this all up to say anything goes. We're setting the citizens back up to think that class 3 weapons are part of that, the way this is written. All the boogeyman that came out of the sky and said this bill was messed up when we stuck a date stamp on is now right back in here. And we've set it up to say, yeah, these are all your rights and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. There's actually no enforcement in this. It's just a bunch of nice words. I'm one of the ones that actually drafted language like this. And I fought this fight before. This isn't if somebody wants to bring in the Firearm Freedom Act, bring another bill. That's not what this bill did. This bill was simply to say, you're not going to enforce it here. And by the way, there was a case mentioned about how the feds said they couldn't do that. That was a specific case that said that we couldn't make the states do background checks, but we could coerce them with money. And boy, wouldn't you know, that came around. They got that done with money. So that said, as I look at this just guts the bill. We have some of this language in the Fire and Freedom Act. It hasn't done anything for us. Simply, the bill as it stands says it's not going to be enforced, and it gives a tool to law enforcement so they can stand there and say if the feds come in, and by the way, there was issue about domestic violence use. What is it going to be, just conveniently that someone gets a call for a domestic violence call at the same time there's an executive order or some congressional law that was passed, and they're going to be there on the doorstep confiscating their AR-15s at the same time? I mean, we're talking about unicorn and lollipop style arguments against a good bill. And quite frankly, I listened to these arguments in the other states that have run this. And you know what the stark difference is between this state and those states? That it was the other party bringing these arguments. It wasn't members of my own caucus pushing this kind of stuff. It's quite frankly, I find it ridiculous.
Further discussion? Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and in favor of the amendment for a couple of reasons. I asked simple questions the other day about if we don't pass this amendment. I asked simple questions about what would happen to the citizens of this state who think that this act somehow protects them from federal prosecution or federal interference. Couldn't get an answer on that. We have the Robinson-Patman Act that taxes ammunition, which comes back into the state and provides millions of dollars to support conservation and sports. What happens? That's a tax act. The bill is written without this amendment. And what this amendment does, it removes that issue about what happens when somehow that tax is not enforced or somehow that tax is violated. There's real life penalties associated with that, but that's a tax act. But unless we amend this bill this way, then it's a violation of a tax. But yet any change to that taxes exists after April the 1st if we don't change this bill and adopt this amendment. We would essentially be, the bill as written without this amendment would deem that to be an unconstitutional. And then who takes on that risk? Well, we transfer that risk to law enforcement officers, and you transfer that risk to every gun owner in the state who thinks that they can go do something and they're not going to be held responsible by the federal government because the state of Wyoming is not going to enforce that law. Let me tell you how that works with the tax. The ATF or the IRS show up at your door. Two special agents, they knock on your door, they show you the badges, they read you your rights, and then they interview you. And then they may arrest you, they may not arrest you. And it goes back, and somewhere, someplace, they convene a grand jury of your fellow citizens to come in. They're going to present evidence, and they're going to come back with an indictment. And then two FBI agents or ATF agents are going to show up at your door, arrest you, and haul you to jail down at the federal courthouse. They're going to fingerprint you. And then you're going to be released on bail, most likely your own recognizance, because you're a good law-abiding citizen. And then you're going to have to hire an attorney. You have to go defend yourself. You're going to go bankrupt because you can't afford to do it, or you're going to take some plea deal because they're going to threaten your kids or your wife to implicate them in your actions. And then you're going to take a plea deal and you're going to have a felony on your record, and then you're not going to be able to own a weapon because you're going to be a felon. And that's not controlled by state law. With this amendment, we have the ability to not put that false idea that somehow we can protect people from the federal government of enforcing its taxation or other laws, which they'll impose. And somehow they think they're going to be protected. They're going to put felonies, and they're going to lose their rights to bear arms under the Constitution. Is that the trap we want to set up for them? Is this amendment perfect? Oh, no, but it's a heck of a lot better than the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Chairman.
You are, Mr. President. Thank you.
Further discussion. We are on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 81. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. That would be a good argument if we were talking about some other bill. This bill has a date stamp on it. It's very specific on laws in the future. I've explained to everyone in this room that the process of all the bills that the laws that are in place are based on 1934, 1968, 1985. The push that's coming out of the federal government going to be after April 1st. All of the arguments that were just given, that somebody's going to be put at risk. This bill doesn't challenge the stuff that's already there in the books. It only challenges what's going forward. And quite frankly, the language in the bill, even before the date stamp, was very specific about chilling effect doctrine. That's what this bill is about. With the date stamp, that makes that even more of a solid bill to safeguard of anything happening. So I reject that the problems that were just mentioned. I reject that those problems are in this bill.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President, for my second time on the First Division. Thank you, Mr. President, for my second time on the First Division. I want to respond respectfully to my friend, the sponsor, and try to clarify for folks here again the point that was made by the Appropriations Chair. There can be a law on the books, for instance, the Robinson-Patman Act, which is a tax on ammunition that helps do a lot of wildlife promotion within the state of Wyoming. A tax actually that was promoted by and lobbied through Congress by sportsmen. And so if there is a change to that, if there is an amendment to that in 2022, effectively Congress amends that law now. The question is that since that's something that happens after the enactment of the unamended bill, is that a law that's enacted by Congress that we are to disregard? And that's the point the Appropriations Chair is making. Effectively, by amending and republishing that law, it now puts itself beyond that date that the sponsor is talking about. So any amendments to Robinson-Patman, any amendment, Pittman-Roberts, let's say it again, Pittman-Roberts. Any amendments to the National Firearms Act, any amendment to any firearm law at the federal government level could bring into question whether the entire law. And so the evil that the sponsor is trying to avoid by having this fixed date after which his bill purports to take effect does not account for the fact that these laws could be amended or updated, perhaps in a way that's constitutional, perhaps in a way that's not. But we are declaring here that we would ignore them all, and the cop on the street is instructed to refuse to enforce them all. So with all due respect, I just want to make sure everybody here understands what is a very compelling argument that the Appropriations Chair makes, which is when these laws are amended and updated, it throws them all into question. So effectively, every federal law, the law enforcement personnel may be at risk for running afoul of any number of federal laws as time goes on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to add some levity to the conversation, because I know it's a heavy vote and a heavy issue, but as you know, there's a crisis in the state, and that crisis is really availability of lawyers. You've heard me lament before, and so I too will be taking note of all of your votes, because if you vote for this amendment, you're voting against the lawyers and their ability to pay off their heavy student loan debt. Because the scholarship availability for lawyers is real low. People like to make those for nurses and police officers, but not the lawyers. So it's like full maximum pay for the lawyers. So the amendment eliminates the ability for lawyers to sue the heck out of government entities with the mandatory minimum recovery of at least 50K. That's notable. So taking note, if you vote for the amendment, you're voting against the lawyers. My people are watching. Take care to protect the young lawyers of our state, the profession. It needs to pay off its student loan debts. We want bigger houses. So some levity to the conversation on a very difficult day, on a very difficult vote. Ultimately, my legal analysis on all of this, which I hope many of you care for, is that it's all unconstitutional. And once again, as I've said before, when I've been frustrated by my forced votes in this office, I'll have to turn to that third branch of government from which I come to protect us from ourselves. And they will, and they do. Thank goodness for that third branch, for the separation of powers. It's what I'm counting on for the vote. To the lawyers.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, for my second time on Division 1, to specifically answer the question that was posed by my colleague from Sheridan County, what happens if somebody chooses not or violates the executive order issued by the executive? What's the penalty? Under Title VI, Crimes and Offenses, Section 65107, official misconduct and penalties. So the penalty is under subsection A, Roman I, commits an act relating to his official duties that the public service does not have the authority to undertake. The penalty would be up to $5,000 fine as a high-level misdemeanor. That's the penalty. That's what that individual would be charged with under the laws of the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, as far as the other branches of government, what was envisioned by Madison and Federalist 46 was to use all the branches of government to fight for the rights of the people. That's why we have a provision in there that calls into the executive, the governor, to make a determination. The judicial branch through the Attorney General's office and the legislature. The amendment puts the full weight and force of all three branches of government behind the people of the state of Wyoming on and for the amendment.
Ready for the question? Question being called on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 81. Request for roll call.
Roll call on Division 1. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French?
No.
No. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Division 1 to Senate File 81, Amendment 1, 23 aye, 7 no.
Division 1 of Senate third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 81 has failed. There is continued amendments.
Division 2.
Oh, Division 2. Division 2, the money.
Attorney General's office, you don't get to do this for free. We need to put our money where our mouth is if we're going to stand behind this, and you need to vote up the appropriation. Vote aye. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Question on Division 2. Roll call? You want to work? Okay. Senator Bouchard?
Thank you, Mr. President. I've talked about the things that the Attorney General hasn't done for the people in the past. I don't see anything in here that this bill, we already have put things that are in law that they are to do to defend the Second Amendment. And that's all we're doing is reciting that.
Senator, are you on Division 2?
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. President. So I'm going to tell you, all the stuff that I've seen that we couldn't appropriate to do good. I mean, for the older people that needed help. And then we're going to put this money on here that's going to do nothing and just go to the AGs. I'm going to vote no on this.
Further discussion? Senator Hicks and then Senator Scott in that order.
Mr. Chairman, on and for, the difference between what the current Attorney General's responsibility is the added responsibility that you find on page 3, new subsection B. The Attorney General shall defend any citizen of Wyoming who is prosecuted by the United States government for violation of any federal action which the subsection of this executive order pursuant to state statutes that we've just adopted through the amendment. If you want the Attorney General to represent the people of the state of Wyoming in any action brought by an unconstitutional act deemed by the Attorney General and the governor, then you need to support that, vote for the amendment or for the bill.
Let's go to Senator Scott.
Division 2.
Division 2, yeah. Senator Scott, we are in Division 2.
Yes, Mr. President. And when you look on item B on page 1, there's another thing that imposes a duty on the Attorney General. You get a petition signed by more than 25 citizens, the Attorney General shall review. And that's going to cost money as well. Mr. President, on and for Division 2.
Senator Bouchard.
On Division 2, on and against, if you go back to a case in Wyoming, McAdams or State versus McAdams, that was a case that the lower court decided that someone did have the right to bear arms. And I'm not going to get in all the details of it, but it's a really simple case. And it was that simple on a traffic stop. Traffic stop was made in Campbell County. And what happened was they noticed that she had a weapon in her pocket. It wasn't even a gun, it was a knife. Lower court said she has a right to bear arms under Article 1, Section 24. The Attorney General, I think, isn't that what this bill's about here? The Attorney General? The Attorney General fought that decision. And now we have on the books, because of the Attorney General who works for the state of Wyoming, is not going to do anything to any police officers that enforce federal regulation because they work for the state. And everyone needs to look it up. State versus McAdams, 1986. And they said, you don't have a right to bear arms. And that went to the Supreme Court, and that's the law of the land. We can't fool people with this bill. The courts have already decided. Our state government executive branch pushed it. And they said, nah, you don't have a right to bear arms. They also said it was a living and breathing document. And that's in statute as well. How can I trust any of this? The bill is simply, it was simply a bill to say, don't enforce it. Now we talk about lawyers in court and what we're doing here. We're going to go to the people who said you don't have a right to bear arms and say, hey, can we do it? Maybe, oh, please let me get down on my knees and beg for my rights.
Senator, you're on the amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's, Mr. President, I'm not going to give the Attorney General more money to say no to us. It's a joke.
Further discussion, Senator Perkins?
Mr. President, by no means do I want to stand up and defend the Attorney General. I think she can do a great job of that herself. Why does the Attorney General go into cases? You know why? Because we pass laws and the Attorney General has to go defend them, no matter how stupid they are. So, when there was a comic strip, Mr. President, years ago, and it was called Pogo. And it was about these animals that lived in a swamp down in the great southern part of our country. And there's a great line I've always remembered, and it was, "We've met the enemy and he is us." And, we have to be careful about that, because when we do that, when we pass laws, they're assumed to be constitutional until, that's the presumption as they enter. When you tell police officers or tell people to do that and we pass a law, guess who has to go in and defend it? Whether, like I say, for good or for ill, it's the Attorney General, and it doesn't come free. There's an example. Just a few years ago, this body passed a law about trespass and trying to keep, and talk about trespass. It was challenged on a First Amendment right. It went. You know what that cost us? What the judgment cost us because that law was deemed to have violated the First Amendment right? $600,000 payout. So there's a cost that comes with what we do here. And it seems to me wholly unfair, because we're tasking this Attorney General to say, go do it, but we're not going to pay for it. Thank you. On and for Division 2.
Ready for the question on Division 2? Roll call, money involved.
Division 2 of third reading amendment number 1. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French?
No.
No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Closing vote? Closing vote closed. 22 aye, 8 no.
Division 2 of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 81 has passed. Third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 81. Read in the amendment.
Senate File 81, third reading amendment number 2, delete.
Senator Kinsky.
Mr. President, I wish to withdraw that amendment in the subsequent amendment 3 and 4.
Amendments, can we do this all in one sweeping motion? Let's do this. Oh, okay. Good correction. Okay, third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 81 has been withdrawn. Third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 81. Read in the amendment.
Senate File 81, third reading amendment number 3, delete.
Senator Kinsky.
I wish to withdraw the amendment.
Third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 81 has been withdrawn. Third reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 81.
Senate File 81, third reading amendment number 4, delete.
Senator Kinsky, you're getting good at this. Go ahead.
I wish to withdraw the amendment.
The amendment has been withdrawn. Third reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 81. We're back on the bill. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. And I wanted to thank my colleagues who worked on this bill. I'm like you, I have firearms, and I think last count 13 rifles and a couple of pistols, but this is not my wheelhouse. And so I'm grateful to those who have worked on this. And really appreciated the words from our appropriations chairman, who reminded me that unfortunately, we don't just vote on titles of bills. I can't count how many emails through the years I've received it and railing one way or the other on a vote just based on the title of the bill. If we just voted on titles, it'd be easy, wouldn't it? The problem is, it's our job in here to make sure that what's in that bill is going to become law, and we want to make sure that it's good law. And Mr. President, I said a couple of days ago that I was concerned to go home if I didn't understand that we took good care of our law enforcement agencies in this bill. I think we've done better with this this morning. I think we're in better shape here. But I would like just a little bit more conversation about that, and maybe the gentleman at the back of the room can help me with that. I just want to make sure, Mr. President, that that I'm not leaving a blue line out there by itself somewhere. I'm not going to do that, especially given the times that we are in. So thank you, Mr. President. I could use a little more help on that one. Thank you.
Seeking some follow-up. Someone would like to take that? Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the statements of my colleagues. We all come down here and try to do the best we can by the people of the state of Wyoming. I think we have these debates, we vote things up and down, we take a position, and hopefully we take something that started and we make it a little better by the time it gets out of the process. We've had an opportunity to have a fair exchange of ideas and debate the concepts, and then we pass the law. I think what we just did with the Second Amendment Preservation Act does exactly what my colleague from Natrona County is asking. We have stood behind law enforcement. We've now put the state of Wyoming through the attorney generals, the legislature, and the governor's office behind and in front of our law enforcement. I think it was good work, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, and I think we've accomplished exactly what my colleague from Natrona County has asked. Thank you.
Further discussion or comment? Ready for the question on the bill? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanting to comment on the bill. I support the amendment, and the bill was a co-sponsor of very similar legislation last year. But the thing I want to bring out is the fact that we're living in Wyoming, where the police officers that are in our communities are our brothers and our sisters, our uncles and our dads. We don't want to be at odds with them. We don't want to bankrupt our local communities. And so I'm really thankful for this amendment that allows me to vote for this bill and put us all on the same page of protecting the Second Amendment for our citizens and for our state, and moving this forward in a positive way. As we know, many times we pass a law and we come back and tweak it a little more. If that needs to be done, I'm sure the good senator who brought this legislation, and I commend him for doing so, will do that in the future. And I just appreciate being able to vote for this bill and urge your aye vote.
Further discussion? Let's go in as Senator Perkins and then Senator Kinski in that order.
Mr. President, just, I think I don't think this bill is in great shape, but I think it's in okay shape. And as it is now, but I think that the important thing about this bill now is I think it focuses and aims this effort at the right people. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is against federal overreach. And the bill as amended now keeps our law enforcement from being caught in the crossfire. And so I think this is a great step forward. in this area because, these are the same guys that, the same men and women in uniform that answer the call and come when you need help, whether it's a big thing or a little thing. They're not the enemy. They're trying to do a job, make a living like the rest of us. Unfortunately for them, unfortunately for us, a lot of their decisions have a lot more life and death consequences than what our jobs do. But nevertheless, they're, as the previous speaker said, they're our family, they're our friends, they're our in-laws. That's meant to be a compliment, not a detraction that they're in-laws. But they're members of our community, and the bill before, one of my concerns, that divided us. And this one, I think, unites us and enables us to be stronger to actually resist some the federal overreach that's happening in this area. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. To my friend from Natrona County, you can be sure that you're standing behind the big blue line with a vote on this bill. My frustration is with the federal government. It's not with my law enforcement officers. It was my pleasure to be mayor in our town for 10 years, and we had a significant sized police force. And I had always believed, but I learned more than ever in that job, that law enforcement was an essential, a critical job, and not a job I ever wanted, nor one that I could ever perform. And the things they see, the things they live with, the danger that a routine traffic stop can go horribly wrong and somebody can die. The danger that you go out on what should be a simple domestic dispute, you're trying to arrest the husband, and the battered woman reaches into the couch cushions and comes out with a weapon and draws down on you. You can be comfortable that with a vote on this bill, that we have preserved the ability of the law enforcement officers to do their job the way they need to do it to keep us and themselves safe, while properly directing our frustration at the federal government and giving us a channel, a constitutional channel, to act upon that frustration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the bill, we all know the significance of this bill, how difficult this bill is for all of us. I think I've spoken with every member of the chamber and lamented about the challenges that the bill has presented and the work that's needed to go into the bill. It's unfortunate that process has had to look this way. That when we understand the challenges that we in Wyoming are faced with, when we learn about the federal threats that are currently underway against our Second Amendment rights, that what's happening at the federal level is wrong, endangers our Second Amendment rights, and it results in fear, and it results in concern, and it results in the desire to take action. And so as the good gun owners that we are, we recognize that there is a threat. And there is a threat at the federal level for our gun rights. And so what does a good gun owner do? They evaluate the tools and the weapons that they have, and they select accordingly. And which weapon is selected will determine the outcome of that fight. The bill as originally presented would result in us turning in on each other, to fighting our friends and colleagues and community members. In my case, I am the daughter of a law enforcement officer. I am married to a law enforcement officer, and my father-in-law also is a law enforcement officer. It runs deep. Of course, in my profession, I work closely with law enforcement officers. I represent law enforcement officers. You've heard me say many times, I routinely and regularly bring to the body bills supporting law enforcement or providing tools for law enforcement. That's no secret. You're exhausted by it, I know. There'll be more next year. I'll remind you of this conversation today. I know the sacrifices they make, that they're feeling on both sides. And so what has happened this year is we have heard that the federal government uniquely is also doing an attack on our law enforcement as well. This is unacceptable. The eye is not on the prize of preserving our Second Amendment rights. Rather, it's been distracted to devolving in on each other. That is not acceptable. The amendment presented makes the bill palatable. I still see concerns, but it does make the bill constitutional. I have been polled so far on this bill. You know, of note, there's a retired judge who frequently communicates with me in my district. And he's retired, and he reached out to me on this bill and said, you know, Tara, what's the deal? Isn't this nullification thing been settled? You know, what don't I see? He's my friend and he's a lawyer, he's a judge, you know, retired judge, who called me out. You know, what is my response to that? You know, no, judge, you're right. That nullification thing is well settled. It is unconstitutional. And I did take an oath in this chamber to only advance constitutional legislation. Being pushed to question my oath regarding the constitutionality of legislation before this body is a request that goes too far. And I thank the bringer of the amendment that allows me to maintain my integrity and credibility to pass constitutional legislation. Recognizing the significant consequences of a failure to do that is a multiplier. You heard the chairman of the appropriations and our former president remind you of a case at this body about litigation that happened. I believe having passed this legislation out unconstitutionally would result in significant costs to the taxpayers by the legislation being unconstitutional on its face, by individual actions to our law enforcement officers and those agencies that employ them, a significant and devastating impact. All the while we are distracted with those squabbles, waste of taxpayer resources, while the better fight and the better weapon is against our federal legislation and through our court systems, not through fighting each other with the type of legislation you saw before this bill was amended. So I'm on and for the bill. I'm on and for the ability to maintain again my oath to pass constitutional legislation in this body. And I appreciate the bill as amended.
Further discussion on Senate File 81, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the bill, still, even this version. And honestly, I like a lot of the intent. I like the idea behind providing this way out. I like the idea of having the state represent individuals against actions that are deemed overreach or excessive. But Mr. President, regrettably, I've only read through this new bill, which is effectively an entire replacement, a few minutes ago. And I think at best, it's been described as kind of lukewarm in terms of being ready to go. If the title weren't Second Amendment Preservation Act, we would not pass this bill because it's just not ready. There are a lot of flaws in its construction. There's probably a lot of ways that it would need to be improved. There are a lot of scenarios that should be thought through. This is a pretty big deal, the kind of thing that typically interim committees work on. So I'm not saying I'm against the idea, but honestly, we want to pass this bill because we just want to get this bill out of the chamber. I get that. I get the sense of it, but I'm not compelled to vote for this bill that's not ready for prime time with a third reading amendment when I honestly just prefer, Mr. President, to do better work and to get things right. The idea that 25 people or an organization representing 25 people is a sufficient threshold to burden the Attorney General, for example, with a substantial amount of work, I struggle with that a little bit. The idea that that individual then, and I think the governor may have to approve, but I'm honestly a little unclear. Maybe, maybe not. They then can effectively unilaterally serve the purpose of the judicial branch without an appeal process through the judicial branch to determine something is unconstitutional pursuant to the Second Amendment and deny an opportunity to, for example, a sheriff in a county to enforce using state funds something based on their own opinion. They're not the judicial branch. I'm not saying they're not good attorneys. I mean, obviously the AG, she knows a heck of a lot more than I do about what a good interpretation of a law is, but there's no judicial review process. So, Mr. President, I get the intent. I get why this is happening. I get why we see this third reading amendment. It just passed. I supported it because it probably is more or less constitutional. But just being constitutional is not a sufficient bar for me to support a piece of legislation. This one's not ready for prime time. On and against. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand testified to this group that my sons are both in law enforcement, locally and federally. But more importantly, I stand with the law enforcement of this state, and I will stand and never do something to damage them. I think these are extraordinary times we're living in, and it forces extraordinary action. And I think we're at that point, and I'm certainly willing to make a statement on and for the bill to send a message that Wyoming stands with our gun owners, and we have a remedy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion on Senate File 81, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This substitute bill, to me, is still nullification. It's just nullification with no teeth. There's really no enforcement mechanism. I understand that there is a misdemeanor and a small fine if they ignore the executive order, but what are the odds of that ever getting prosecuted? Probably zero. I guess it's just, do we want to move this on to make ourselves look good and look like we did something? I guess, but you know, in this handout I'm looking at, it still says, you know, to prevent the federal government from enforcing these laws. That's basically nullification. So, you know, to say this isn't, you know, it's kind of disingenuous. This is, but it's basically a strongly worded letter and nothing more. Vote it up or vote it down. I guess it really doesn't matter which way you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion? Go back to Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we go through this bill, it seems to me that everything in it is already included in our state statutes. It's already included in the Constitution. We're putting a bill, if I could use a term earlier, with the title out there to pass, but it does nothing more than what we already have, in my opinion, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion? Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, you heard this a little bit ago from the chairman of judiciary. She said, the judge said, haven't we already figured out this nullification thing? That's kind of where you're not seeing this here. This whole bill is basically now going to say, let's go back to the federal government and ask one more time, are the federal government's laws on guns overreaching? And they're going to say, no, we've got the Commerce Clause. We can do whatever we want on guns. The state's got to sit down and shut up and take it. We've done this already. All of the stuff that's in this bill, it's been argued. The judge knows very well what happens in that case. You know, we've kept talking about the police officers. The original bill gave protection to the police officers because when the feds came in, remember, that's what this bill was about. When the feds came into the state to enforce federal law, the local law enforcement had the ability to say, sorry, we can't do that here. So now what we did is we said, now we're going to just say, forget all that. No, now you got to help the federal officers confiscate guns. And we'll go take it to court. And then when we go to the court, they'll just say, yeah, you got to do it. That's what we got here. We had a bill like that before. Everyone, well, not everyone, we have new people here, know that I voted. I walked off the floor. I didn't want to fight with my friends. And that's unlawful. I'm not supposed to miss a vote, especially intentionally. And I did it because I didn't want to fight with my friends, because it was one of those bill titles that we do. And now I'm going to vote no. I'm going to vote no right here. I'm not going to walk off the floor this time, because I've got drug into a fight with everybody because we wanted to pass a bill that does nothing.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to clarify some pieces there. You know, I do believe that the right tool is through our state to the federal courts, to the Supreme Court of the United States. That's the tool, not suing Officer Smith upstairs for his mortgage and his kid's college account. The process, the tool, the weapon that should be selected is the state of Wyoming against the United States to determine that outcome. In fact, what has happened when that's occurred? Let's read that case law. In the landmark decision from 2008 of the District of Columbia versus Heller, that District of Columbia, that liberal progressive state, that in 2008, the US Supreme Court determined that their ban on handguns, that court defined that the Second Amendment protects an individual's rights. The US Supreme Court precedent gives the Second Amendment rights to individuals, not just states where they're militias, but an individual's right to, one, possess a firearm unconnected to service in a militia of note, two, use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes, particularly self-defense. And furthermore, the language often cited by federal courts and described by scholars as dicta of the strongest sort, the court stated that bans on possession by felons and sawed-off shotguns is presumptively legal, associated with Congress's power to do that with the Commerce Clause. But of note, our courts have granted individuals their Second Amendment rights. Those rights remain. That is the law of the land. That is the tool to use, is that litigation, accessing our US Supreme Court as a determiner of how far Congress can act. The history looks good for us on that front, and that is the way to go. Furthermore, as mentioned also, in the Prince case, this concern that the feds can come and start telling Officer Smith what to do. No, my friends, that's been declared unlawful in the United States Supreme Court case of Prince, where they tried to enforce that with the Brady Handgun Act. So no, our checks and balances are in place. They are working. The system works. It's a hard-fought battle. It will continue to be a hard-fought battle, we know. As I have identified, the recent actions of the federal government are concerning. They are concerning, and we must be prepared to fight, and this bill allows us to do that rather than suing Officer Smith. That's the remedy we're seeking, not a $100,000 judgment from Officer Smith's family, which is what you're seeking when the original bill. It's ridiculous.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, there was suggestion made in the debate that we aren't really doing anything new with this. Mr. President, I rise to contest that. Mr. President, what we're doing now, you can see it in 914-101 Second Amendment defense. It's in the green books. It's reproduced here in the amendment. Reproduced so we can add a section B. And that section B is something major. Why we had to pass the budget amendment. Attorney General shall defend any citizen of Wyoming is prosecuted in the United States government for violation of any federal action, subject, et cetera. We're going to provide people with defense so they can exercise their Second Amendment rights. That is a major step forward with this bill. Mr. President, on for the bill.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, just want to try to close this out with some of the statements that have been made out here. To dovetail in with my tall colleague from Natrona County, that there's nothing new here that's already not in statutes. He highlighted one substantive addition to an existing statutes. If you go to the first page of the amendment, 9-14-103 is created. This is a new, complete new section in the laws of the state of Wyoming that establishes a process. Now, to protect the citizens of their Second Amendment rights. Now, let's talk about the issue of if this is just another nullification. So let me describe to you what's called the anti-commandeering doctrine has been litigated before the Supreme Court of the United States 4 times in the history of this country, all the way back to 1842. Reiterated 4 times, a state can legally bar state agents from enforcing federal gun control. Refusal to cooperate with the federal enforcement rests on a well-established legal principle known as anti-commandeering doctrine. The last opinion, as articulated my colleague from Sheridan County, was wrote by the late, great Justice Scalia in 1997. Completely legal. No determination as constitutionally is necessary to invoke the anti-commandeering doctrine. It's been between the Supreme Court of the United States 4 times in our history and upheld as a legal mechanism. So how could that be nullification, which has been struck down by the states and by the courts over and over and adjudicated on the battlefields of the United States of America? It is legal. It is constitutional. It is new law, and it provides and affords protections for the people of the state of Wyoming, the gun owners of the state of Wyoming, protects your Second Amendment rights, and puts the full force and power of the state of Wyoming to the task to do that, Mr. President. On and for the bill.
Further discussion, question being called. Senate File 81, Second Amendment Preservation Act, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 81 roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French?
Aye.
Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks?
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky?
Aye.
Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 81, 24 aye, 6 no.
Senate File 81, Second Amendment Preservation Act, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 81 has passed the Senate. Majority Floor Leader Driscoll.
Mr. President, I move we stand recessed till 2 p.m.
Announcements. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I have an announcement. Minerals Committee number 9, your favorite committee, will meet today 15 minutes afternoon recess in Capitol Extension Room W4 and online. And we'll hear bill numbers, House Bill 102 Wyoming Preference Act of 1971 amendments, and House Bill 207, coal-fired generation facility closures, litigation funding. Thank you.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation Committee will meet upon adjournment this afternoon to take up two bills. House Bill 144, electric vehicle fee updates. House Bill 19, engrossed antique motor vehicles. That will be in W2 down on the causeway. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further announcements? Further announcements? Oh, there we are. Senator Rothfuss.
May I briefly have privilege of the floor?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Folks, could we give attention to Senator Rothfuss, please?
We have, watching that previous debate, some of the best students in the state of Wyoming from the Snowy Range Academy in Laramie. If they would stand up, please. In the balcony, we've got two balconies worth. These are exceptional students from Laramie. Welcome to the Senate today. I'd appreciate an enthusiastic round of applause. Thank you. Welcome.
And Mr. President,
Hold it. Okay, just a sec. Snowy Academy, welcome to the Senate. Who hollered at me? Right on here, Senator Boner.
thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, agriculture, will meet tomorrow upon adjournment in Capitol Extension Room W2 and online to consider House Bill 188, irrigation district loans, House Bill 229, livestock identification choice act.
Further announcements? Further announcements? Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 2 appropriations will begin, will continue its joint conference committee on House Bill 1, the budget. We'll do that as soon as we can get our down some lunch and get to room 301 and meet our counterparts, the light committee from the House. And in addition, we do have one re-referral, I believe, and we will try and get to that this evening. And so we'll announce that later, but that is just a re-referral. Thank you.
Very good. No further announcements. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate will stand